Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody can hear my voice and see the presentation on the screen. Yeah. So, a couple of questions which I've been getting regularly is about the reopening of classes. See, guys, the government has very conveniently said that we can start, but a lot of guidelines are there in terms of social distancing and other organizational issues, right? Until we are able to guarantee that it will be totally safe, we would not be taking any risk because we may not have adequate space to sit everybody at the same time. And I'm sure you guys agree that just having 1/4 of the class or 1/2 of the class and then running the same session again and again is technically very difficult for us. So for the foreseeable future, we will be having these classes online, right? Okay. Now moving ahead. It's just recently that we had our Republic Day, right? 26th of January, Republic Day, and it is very appropriate that we learn about the Constitution of India today. I'm sure those of you who have been following the news would have seen that the 26th of January this year was marred by certain incidents which were against the sanctity of that day, were against the holiness of that day, right? And as law aspirants, I'm sure many of us felt ill at the sights which we happened to see. Instead of the beautiful parade and the show of our might and strength, we were forced to see certain views which were not exactly showing the strength of our nation. So let's talk about the Constitution of India, right? Many of us have heard about the Constitution of India. Some of us might even have seen the Constitution of India. But I just want to put out a simple question. Do you know what is meant by the Constitution of India? What exactly is the Constitution of India? What is there in the Constitution of India? When somebody says Constitution, what comes to your mind? What is it? Okay. Rules and guidelines, written laws, laws enforced, laws and rules. Okay. A lot of you keep telling me it's laws. Okay. Rights and duties. Okay. The one word which basically seems to be a common theme in most of your answers is the word law. Guys, do you really think the Constitution of India contains laws for the land? Can you name any law which is there in the Constitution of India? If you think it contains laws, can you name any law which is contained in the Constitution of India? Law, IPC, CRPC are just two examples. There are hundreds of different codes like that. Those are codes, right? The Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedures Code, the Civil Procedures Code, and all that. They are all different codes. Yes, the laws are contained in different codes. Like for contracts, we saw the Indian Contracts Act, we saw the IPC, CRPC, right? You must have heard of the Farm Act. For example, the Farm Bill itself getting converted into a Farm Act would be a law, right? So for each and everything, there is a separate law. So then what exactly is the Constitution? All of this is not written in the Constitution. So what exactly is the Constitution? Well, whenever something new is created, one of the first things that we want to know is what is this new object, right? The first thing we're interested in knowing is what is this new object. Second, how does this object function, right? For example, when you purchase a new mobile phone, one of the first things that you get with it, whether you read it or not, is a user manual. It tells you the specifications of the phone. It tells you how to operate the phone. It tells you what to do in case there's a problem with the phone, so on and so on, right? A user manual. So think of the Constitution of India like a user manual. When the founders of this nation, when the great freedom fighters were finally successful in their endeavor and India got its freedom, 15th August 1947, we decided, okay, we need something to govern us by. It cannot be like the old king's rule कि जो राजा ने कह दिया वही सही है, right? Because we have decided we are going to be a democracy, we need an established set of rules which very clearly help us function, right? And then came the great task of creating the Constitution of India. So the Constitution of India, more or less, can be seen as the rule book of India, or the guidebook of India, or the handbook of India. It is the user manual of our country, right? So the Constitution of India was actually a handwritten document. Of course, in those times also, it is possible to print it, but great care was taken because we like very ornate things, we like decorative things, right? So even in that times, the Constitution was actually written by hand. There was a person who actually sat down and wrote the Constitution of India. Do you know who wrote the Constitution of India? No, this is the trick question. I'm not asking you who was the founder or who is the father, or I'm literally asking you who wrote the Constitution of India. कागज पे कलम किसने डाला? Right? It's a very interesting question, right? Who was literally the person who took pen and paper together and wrote down whatever was dictated by the people? So remember, 395 articles in 22 parts, 8 schedules at the time of its enactment, right? Currently, there are about 470 articles or so in 25 parts and 12 schedules and 104 amendments. This is as of 25th January 2020, right? Of course, there could have been a few amendments. You'll have to search up for that. This is the latest information that I have. Yes, Shivam, it would be better if you can take down these points. If you write down these points, they will help you remain in memory. So I'm going back. Remember, originally when the Constitution was written, and I am going to tell you who wrote it, but originally when it was written, it was created in 395 articles distributed across 22 parts. When it was created, there were 8 schedules in it. Now, currently it has about 470 articles in 25 parts. It keeps going around more or less. There are about 12 schedules and 104 amendments as of 25th January 2020. Right? Now, the person who wrote the Constitution of India was Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada. A gentleman by the name of Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada, a calligrapher, a person who writes professionally, right? So a calligrapher by the name of Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada was the person who was entrusted with the task of writing the Constitution of India by hand. And if you take a look at each page of the Constitution, then artists from Shantiniketan, which included people like Bihar Ram Manohar Sinha and Nandlal Bose, they have decorated each and every page of the Constitution with beautiful drawings on the borders, right? So it's not a simple boring document with stuff written in it, but it's actually a beautiful work of art. If you open the Constitution and turn every single page along with the beautiful calligraphy of Raizada, you will also find the artwork of artists from Shantiniketan. Do you know Shantiniketan are there? Do you know what is Shantiniketan? Jatin, most important articles are given in the IQ book. Whichever is given, and some of them, if they are highlighted, they are the important ones. Yeah, so Shantiniketan was is associated with Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, right? Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, the famous Bengali poet, he established Shantiniketan. It's actually a school now, right? It's a residential school now. It was Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore who was there. So a lot of great artists of our country have actually come from the stables of Shantiniketan. So the artists of Shantiniketan were given the duty of, in fact, I would call it a privilege of actually decorating the Constitution of India. And yes, it's a place where you don't, it's their open classrooms and stuff like that. Krishna, why do you want to keep scribbling on my screen यार? नर्सरी में होते तो अच्छा खासा स्क्रिबल कर लेते. Come on, grow up. चलो. So, when the original constitution was created, a total of 283 members actually signed the constitution, right? The Constituent Assembly, which was formed at that time, a total of 283 members of the Constituent Assembly were there who signed it. And finally, it came into effect on 26 January 1950. Probably, 26 January 1950 hence is also celebrated in our country as Republic Day, because officially that is the day when the Constitution of India was signed and brought into effect. So 283 members were there in the Constituent Assembly who signed it. You can find their signatures in it even today. Now, it is the longest constitution in the world. Right? India is famous for a lot of things. We are not exactly chindi chores when it comes to elaborate things, right? The longest epic in the world, some of the longest written books in the world, and so on and so forth. So the longest written constitution in the world is also the Indian Constitution, right? It may not be the most original constitution because we have borrowed a lot from different places. But the reason why it is the longest, we have taken a lot of time to think and develop. It took almost 2 years, 11 months and 17 days, that is almost 3 years, for the assembly to finish writing the entire constitution. Yes. So, it took around 2 years, 11 months and 17 days for the assembly to finish writing the entire constitution. And that's why it's called the longest constitution in the world. And there are many copies of this constitution available, right, at very important places. Especially they are kept under sealed conditions, under glass and in special conditions. So if you ever get the chance to go and see an original copy of the constitution, it's worth seeing. For example, at my alma mater, I have seen an original copy of the constitution, and believe me guys, it's a huge book and it's an awe-inspiring scene just to take a sight of that book lying in that glass container. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, how many pages? I'm not sure how many pages it is, but I'm sure it runs into quite some, right? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the first law minister of free India, was a jurist, economist, social reformer. He was the person who was selected to be the chairman of the committee, right? The committee which was formed to decide on what should be part of the constitution, what should be its features, so on and so forth. So when the committee was formed, it was decided that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was also the first law minister of India. He was extremely well known for his knowledge of different constitutions, right? It is known that he was a constitutional scholar, right? He had studied the constitutions of multiple countries. So it was but natural that an expert jurist like him was selected to be the chairman of the committee. And this is the reason why he is also known as the father of the Indian Constitution, right? He is known as the father of the Indian Constitution for the very simple reason that he was also the chairman of the committee which decided. Now guys, here's something which you'll not regularly hear teachers saying, but on YouTube, right, there is a 10-part series called Samvidhan. On YouTube, there is a 10-part web series called Samvidhan. It's actually originally aired on Rajya Sabha TV. If you just type out Samvidhan on YouTube, you will get this. It's anchored by Swara Bhaskar. Sorry for that. But it's a beautiful mini series which shows exactly how the Constitution of India came into being. It shows the proceedings of the drafting committee, how each point was debated, how certain points were fought for, how certain points were fought against, right? It's a brilliant docudrama, and it won't take you more than 3 or 4 days if you binge watch, right? And it's definitely worth binge watching. So for law aspirants, this is one thing which I would always recommend, that whenever you get time, go and watch the docudrama Samvidhan. It is easily available on YouTube. Okay. Chalo. Now, there was another significance behind selection of 26th of January 1950 as the day on which the constitution would be brought into effect, because it is the anniversary of Purna Swaraj Divas, right? Before we wanted complete independence, Gandhiji and others actually were happy if we could get just dominion status. Dominion status means we would be independent to rule ourselves, but still we would be the subjects of the British Empire. They said we would be happy if we just got dominion status. But people like Bhagat Singh, and a lot of other revolutionaries, they were like nothing doing. It's either full independence or nothing, right? Purna Swaraj, complete independence. They wanted total independence. They did not want any such thing as dominion status or partial independence or anything like that. So 26 January 1930 was the day when Indian Congress finally decided, okay, the entire country and all the radicals are also in mood for full independence, and the air in the country is moving towards full independence. So it would be wise to give in to that. So they declared that we will be fighting for Purna Swaraj from that day onwards. Purna Swaraj Din or Purna Swaraj Divas was what it was. So as an anniversary of the Purna Swaraj Day, where they seeded the fight for complete independence, 26 January became doubly important. And that's why it was selected to be the day on which the Constitution of India would be brought into force. Okay. Now, just a couple of other facts, not directly related to the Constitution, but nevertheless important. The national anthem of India, right, Jana Gana Mana, was written by Rabindranath Tagore. It was originally scribed in Bengali, written in Bengali, and later it was translated to Hindi by Abid Ali in 1911. Right? So, Rabindranath Tagore is the person who has given us our national anthem, Jana Gana Mana. Do you know which is our national song and who is the author of that? Yes. See guys, if you want to note these things down, it's excellent. A lot of these things may be in the book. The video will be made available. Okay. So, the national song of India is Vande Mataram. There's a book called Anand Math, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, right? There's a book called Anand Math, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. And in the book Anand Math, there's the song Vande Mataram. So, Vande Mataram was selected to be the national song of India. Rabindranath also holds the distinction of being responsible for two more national anthems. While he has directly composed the national anthem of Bangladesh as well, which is Amar Shunar Bangla, he is supposed to be the person who has inspired the national anthem for Sri Lanka, right? It's not a direct composition of his, but Rabindranath Tagore is supposed to be the inspiration behind the national anthem of Sri Lanka. But the two direct national anthems composed by Rabindranath Tagore include Jana Gana Mana for India and Amar Shunar Bangla for Bangladesh. Jatin, this is for law entrance exams legal awareness section. Okay. Similarly, the Indian national flag, right, which is the current format of three colors, saffron, white and green, with the chakra in the middle. It was conceptualized by actually a farmer of Machilipatnam, right, from Andhra Pradesh, called Pingali Venkayya. So as you can see that in our country, some of the greatest symbols of our country are not necessarily created by all famous artists and by commission. Even the common man can often be given a great respect, and his creation can be taken to represent the nation. So the Indian flag, which represents the entire country, the concept was by a simple farmer from Andhra Pradesh. Zana, you'll have to just find that out. I don't remember the name of the Sri Lankan anthem. Okay. Now, our constitution is called a bag of borrowings, right? So tomorrow if somebody says why do you copy, then you can say that our constitution is also copied. No, nothing like that. See, it's like, why should I reinvent the wheel if it has already been invented? When something is good, there's absolutely nothing wrong in adopting it, right? If somebody has written a good law, then there's nothing which says that I cannot adopt it because it is for somebody else. So, like I said, B.R. Ambedkar was a constitutional scholar. He used to he had studied constitutions of different countries. So, when the drafting committee was actually creating the entire constitution for our own country, they took inspiration from different places, right? So, we are going to see each one of them in detail, what we have taken from which particular place. And we start with United Kingdom. Yes, United Kingdom, the country from which we were fighting to get our independence, right? We fought against the Britishers, we got independent, but then we decided that there are certain things in their constitution, and it's not a written constitution, but there are certain things which is definitely worth adopting. So, the parliamentary form of government, right? In democracy, we have two systems. Like countries like UK, India, we all follow the parliamentary form of government, where we have a parliament and a cabinet of ministers. In US, they follow the presidential form of government, in which the president is the sole head. In India, we do have a president, but the president is more of a titular head, right? They are more for show and ceremony. The actual powers reside with the prime minister and the cabinet. So, from the United government, we took parliamentary government, the concept of a single citizenship, right? We are not citizens of our state plus country. We are all just citizens of India, right? Whereas you go to the US, then there is a state citizenship and there's a federal citizenship. In India, we do not have the concept of being citizens of a state. We are all citizens of one country. The rule of law, right? The established law will decide what is right and wrong. The legislative speaker and the role, when we talk about the parliament, the assembly, we have a legislative speaker who presides over the Sabha, right? So this person's position came from the United Kingdom, and the entire legislative procedure, right? All the way the legislative assembly functions, the entire functioning was taken from the United Kingdom. Okay, a lot of students are asking me the purpose of this lecture. Guys, there's a section called legal awareness, which may or may not be there in CLAT, but is there in practically every other entrance exam. Whether you talk about symbiosis, whether you talk about Christ, whether you talk about IELTS, most of the other papers will have a section of legal awareness where you might get asked questions from the constitution, right? And this can always be a part of the GK section. So yes, there's a purpose behind this. LSAT does not have a legal section at all. Okay. Now, from the United States, what have we borrowed? US, America. The Bill of Rights, right? They have something called the Bill of Rights. Then the federal structure of the government. So federal structure mein we have the central government and we have the state government, right? We have the central. So this federal government is equivalent to our central government. The electoral college, right? We elect the members of parliament, and the members of parliament then go ahead and create the leader of the ruling party creates the PM, and we have the president and so on and so forth. We don't directly elect them. So the system of electoral college. And this year in the US elections, the concept of electoral college, I think, was made pretty clear to everybody who was observing it. Independent judiciary and separation of powers, right? We have definitely three different, the judiciary, the executive and the legislative, right? The judiciary cannot be interfered with by the parliament and vice versa. So the power of judiciary being independent, the concept comes from the United States. The concept of judicial review, where the judiciary has powers to review a lot of things. The president
as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and the concept of equal protection of law. So these are some of the things which we have taken from the United States. Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights, just like we have fundamental rights and stuff like that. What are the basic rights to be given to the people, right? So that concept of fundamental rights, it comes from United States. They themselves have adopted it from the French Revolution. Okay. Yeah. From Ireland, a very small country, we don't even generally think about this country, but even Ireland has a place in our constitution. The directive principles of state policy, right? You must have heard of fundamental duties, you must have heard of fundamental rights, and then there are directive principles of state policy. Principles which are created but which are not enforceable by writ, right? These are more like guidelines. The directive principles of state policy, they are established, but they're only guidelines. If you follow them, well. If they are not followed, then they cannot be enforced by law. So this fundamental of DPSP comes from Ireland. Australia, all the way across the world. From Australia, we have the freedom of trade between states, right? Today, if I want to trade with a person from another state, I'm absolutely free to do so. Similarly, national legislative power to implement treaties even on matters outside normal federal jurisdiction, right? So when you are establishing treaties with other countries, then it goes at a central level, right? Even if it is not explicitly within their powers, but when it comes to national matters, it is the central government which plays the role. Then the concurrent list. So there are 3 lists, duties, called the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. So on the 3 lists are the different duties which are to be performed. One by the center, second by the state. The third list includes those duties which are divided between the state and the center. So this list is known as the concurrent list. And a lot of terminology in our preamble, right? The preamble is the thing which comes before the actual constitution. It's like an introduction to the constitution. So a lot of words, lot of terminology which are there in the preamble, they are taken from the Australian constitution. From France, and the concept of democracy has its roots in France, because even the American War of Independence was inspired a lot by the French thinkers. So the ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité, that is liberty, freedom, égalité, equality, and fraternity, brotherhood, right? Liberty, equality, and brotherhood. These 3 concepts have been adopted from French. The Americans have also adopted it, and we have also adopted it. So across the world, for democracy, these 3 concepts we have the French to thank for: liberty, equality, and fraternity. From Canada, right? Canada has always been somewhere around the border for us. Even today, a lot of fascination is there with Canada. But Canada has also been contributing to our constitution. The concept of quasi-federal government, that is a federal system where the center is strong, right? They are not separated, but a strong center is taken from Canada. The distribution of powers between central and state governments is again from Canada. And finally, some of the powers, when everything, and after the division is done, the extra powers of certain things, they are retained by the central government. So these concepts of differences between the state and the central government, what powers go to whom, is all taken from the Canadian Constitution. Yes, Tanisha. Now, the Soviet Union, it does not even exist, right? Years before, we had the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, but balkanization and other things, and the USSR was broken up into smaller countries. But still, the USSR had been a great ally of India, right? Although it is America versus Russia, it is Russia which India has been more friendly with. So from Soviet Union, we have add the concept of fundamental duties under Article 51A, and the Planning Commission for overseeing economic development. Although now we do not have the Planning Commission, now it is the Niti Aayog. But the concept of having a body called the Planning Commission, which would completely oversee the economic development of the nation, the concept came from Russia. Now, smaller things from the German Weimar Constitution, the emergency provision under Article 356, and we have all known about the emergency which was imposed in India, right? The different kinds of emergencies which can take place. So when an emergency is imposed, what are the provisions? That concept has been taken from the German Constitution. The process of amending the Constitution itself is in the Constitution, and this concept comes from South Africa. The Constitution itself can be changed is a concept which we have taken from South Africa. And everything should follow rules and regulations. That is called due process. This concept is taken from Japan. The concept of due process, that everything should follow rules and regulations. There's a systematic method of elections. There's a systematic method of establishing committees, commissions, right? A lot of these due processes we have taken from the people who are known to be very systematic, and that is the Japanese. Okay. Now, talking about rights. Today we know that we have a lot of fundamental rights given to us under the Constitution. Originally, when the Constitution was framed, the right to property was also one of the fundamental rights. Right? Originally, when the Constitution was made, the right to property was also given as a fundamental right to the citizens of India. In fact, Article 31 of the Constitution said that no person shall be deprived of property save by authority of law. Right? The Article 31 of our Constitution in fact said that no person shall be deprived of property saved by authority of law. But in 1978, under the 44th Amendment, this no longer remained as a fundamental right. Right to property became a legal right, but it is no longer a fundamental right. Right? Chal. Now, the original copies of the Constitution were written in both Hindi and English. And each member of the Constituent Assembly, they signed 2 copies of the Constitution. So one in Hindi, the other in English. This is just basic trivia. What we need to understand is now the contents of the Constitution. What is there in the Constitution itself? Right now we have tried to understand how it was made, who made it, what was sources of inspiration, so on and so forth. But now it is time we start understanding what is actually there if we open and read the Constitution of India. So, the Constitution of India, it begins with something known as the preamble, right? The preamble, it defines India. It declares that India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic and a welfare state committed to secure justice, liberty and equality for the people and for promoting fraternity, dignity of the individual and unity and integrity of the nation. See, a lot of terms in one single sentence, and yet each one of them has a very distinct meaning, and it shows something very unique about our country, right? Let's take a look at them one by one. What do we mean by we are a sovereign nation? What do you understand that we are a sovereign nation? So sovereign means we are totally independent, we are our own masters. We don't take rule orders from anybody else, right? It's not that we are dominion status under anybody. We are totally independent. We are a sovereign nation. We are our own masters. Socialist means we care for the people. So those who cannot care for themselves in our society, the poor in our society, will be taken care of by the government. So we sort of have socialist tendencies that so we have things like different schemes, right? Garib Yojana, this Yojana. So the reason for that is the government says that those who can will take care of themselves, those who can't, the government is there to take care of them, right? So socialist. Secular, we don't consider any religion to be above other. We give equal importance to all the religions. Religion will not play a role in the state. Religion will be given importance, but it will not play a role in the state, right? The state by itself is independent of religion. Democratic is obviously of the people, for the people, and by the people, right? Completely the rule of people. Republic. Now, this is interesting. We are not a pure democracy, we are a democratic republic, which means we don't directly rule the country by the people. What we do is we elect our representatives, and it is the representatives who take decisions on our behalf, right? So, you see, if it was a true democracy, then for every decision to be made, the people will be voting. And in a large country like India, it is extremely difficult to have 100% pure democracy. We cannot take public opinion for each and everything. So what we do is we follow the democratic republic model, where people's representatives sit for them in the assembly, and on behalf of the people, it is the representatives who take the decision. So we are a welfare state, right? It goes to it goes to supporting socialism, right? Welfare schemes are there for people who cannot fend for themselves. We understand what is justice, liberty, and equality. Fraternity is bhaichara, dignity of the individual, right? Every person has certain self-respect which should be protected, and unity and integrity of the nation. Yes. Yes, Laksh, any country, most of the countries whom we call democracy are actually not pure democracies. In a pure democracy, the people will take part in each and every decision making. The US also has a set of elected representatives who then represent the people in the Senate and the Congress. So even the US is a democratic republic. In fact, I think maybe one of the only countries which I can remember which is a pure democracy is maybe Switzerland, right? Where there's a referendum for each and every policy that they make. But I'm not very sure about that. As far as I know, most large democracies are actually democratic republics. Okay. Now, as of 2020, and this is the data is about a year back, so you need to check whether anything happened in the last year, right? There have been about 104 amendments to the Constitution of India. I'll try to look up this data. I'll also encourage you strongly to look up how many amendments, have there been any amendments in the past 1 year. Okay. Now, I'm going to quickly run you through the parts of the Constitution itself. Part 1 of the Constitution. It simply defines the union and its territories, right? If you open the Constitution and look at Part 1, it defines what is India, where is India, right? Union and its territories. Part 2 is about the citizenship. Who is a citizen of India? How do you get citizenship of India? So on and so forth. Part 3, the most important part, contains the fundamental rights of the citizens of India. Part 4 are directive principles of state policy which cannot be enforced by writ, hence they are more of just guidelines. Part 4A, because this was not there originally in the constitution, it was later through an amendment added. These are the fundamental duties. While creating the constitution, the makers, they added the fundamental rights, but somehow forgot that rights and duties must go hand in hand. So through a later amendment, the fundamental duties were added to the Constitution of India. Again, the fundamental duties as given in the Constitution of India are just guidelines. They are not enforceable by law. So in case you do not follow fundamental duties, you do not perform your fundamental duties, legally speaking, nothing can be done. If your fundamental rights are violated, you have every right to go to the court of law. But if you have not performed your fundamental duty, no action can be taken against you. That's one of the saddest part, I think, about the rights and duties concept in India. Okay, I'm not going through every part, the important ones. Part 15 talks about the concept of elections, how elections are to be held, what is the procedure, so on and so forth. Part 17 talks about the official language. Part 18, extremely important, it talks about emergency provisions. And part 20, it talks about the amendments. Right? So let's take a look at our fundamental rights. Article 14 to 18 in the Constitution of India, and these article numbers are important because in the symbiosis exam they have asked this, that a right of equality comes under which article, right? So these fundamental rights wale articles you have to keep in mind, you'll have to memorize these. So article 14 to 18, which includes the right to equality. Article 14 talks about equality before law. When you go in front of law, no person is considered higher or lower than the other. Everybody is treated, or at least theoretically supposed to be treated equally before the law. Article 15, it is prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Right? So whenever we are talking about discrimination, then we are talking about Article 15. Article 16 is about equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. Right? So when government is giving jobs, then every person should have equality of opportunity. You cannot have any discrimination against people. So that is what Article 16 says. Article 17 is for the abolition of untouchability. And Article 18 is the abolition of titles. In ancient, during the British time, so that they could take favor of certain kings and stuff, they used to hand out titles, Rai Bahadur, right? They used to give all these titles. So what this Article 18 does, it has abolished all titles. Nobody can use any title except military or academic titles, right? So a doctor, a professor, or a colonel, these titles are acceptable. There is no other title which you will see which can officially be used in India. Do you get that? Yes, knighthood, like Sir, Lord, these titles which still exist a lot in the UK. In India, we have done away with them, right? If you have a military title, if you have an academic title, that's the only title which you can carry. Others, no title exists. No titles exist. Yes, there's no such thing as Raja, Maharaja. These titles no longer exist. That's by Article 18. So did you understand these 5 rights to equality, Articles 14 to 18? Okay. Now, right to freedom comes under 19 to 22. The right to freedom. What rights? Article 19 gives you the right for protection of certain rights regarding freedom of speech. Now, many people make the mistake of thinking that freedom of speech means whatever I want I can say and nobody can stop me. That is not the meaning of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech only means your freedom is till the point it does not harm others. Because if you have the freedom, then others also do have certain freedoms. So these freedoms are not unlimited freedoms, right? They are within the bounds of law. They're within the bounds of human decency. So when you say that you have freedom of speech, it means you have the freedom of speech within its limits. Of course, if you cross certain limits, then you will be punished by the strength of law, right? So Article 19, it protects your freedom of speech, but in a limited way. Article 20 is protection in respect of conviction for offences. So there are certain protections that you will get for being convicted for certain offences. The details you'll have to open the Constitution and see. But as of now, just remember it's protection in respect of conviction for offences. 21, the most important article, is the protection of life and personal liberty. Your right to life, your right to liberty, these are all under Article 21. Recently added, Article 21A gives you the right to education. And Article 22 gives you the protection against arrest and detention in certain cases. Again, you'll have to take a look at the Constitution to understand which specific cases they mean. See, custodial deaths, nobody can ever die nobody can ever die. No policeman has the right to kill somebody. If it happens, there will be action. You cannot take the life of a person. Personal liberty, yes. Privacy. Okay, Article 19. Can I say whatever I want? Well, within limits, yes, I can. You cannot punish me for expressing my views. But if my views are such that they are harmful to others, or they are going to incite violence in public, then it goes beyond my right to speech. So as long as my speech does not affect others, I have the right to say whatever I want. That's right to speech. Who wants to go to the previous one? Surya, these are not vague rights, right? I have just included one line. Open the Constitution of India. They are explained in detail. And yet some of them are worded a little bit of like that so that they are open to interpretation, right? Law does not want to bind itself in things which will be problematic. So as long as possible, they will try to make it clear, but they will leave a little bit of leeway so that it is open to interpretation. Yes, Qaish. हाँ, freedom of speech में क्या, Surya? What about freedom of speech? See, they cannot give you precise list of instructions of what is correct and what is not. Because what happens if you do something which is outside that list? Then it becomes difficult to give a judgment because it is not written. So they will give you a set of guidelines, right? They will give you a set of guidelines, and then it is up to the judge to decide. And yes, speech is subjective. What may be right for me may be wrong for you. Speech is subjective. That's right. Blasphemy cases. Surya is talking about blasphemy cases. Blasphemy cases is when you talk ill about religion or religious figures or gods, right? Now, what may be okay for you may not be okay for me. So it is up to the judges to decide whether the speech that was made was actually harmful or not. And remember, for every verdict, a judge has to give the ratio, which means the reason behind their judgment. So it's not like that judges say guilty and then they go away. No. Whenever judges give a decision, they have to give a complete ratio behind their judgment, which is the explanation of their judgment. So don't think that judges get away with deciding whatever they want. They are bound by the law to explain their judgment. I hope you got that. Chal. Next. Now, Article 19. It guarantees all citizens the 6 rights, which includes right to freedom of speech and expression, the right to assemble peacefully and without arms. Arms means weapons. The right to form associations or unions. The right to move freely throughout the territory of India. The right to reside and settle in any part of the country, in any part of the territory of India. And the right to practice any profession or carry on any occupation, trade, or business. Right? We took a look at Article 19 before. So, Article 19, what all does it give? It gives me these 6 rights. Lawyers further challenge the judgment in some instances. Yes, yes. Because judges are also not perfect, right? And it's not that judge is always more learned than the lawyer. So a good lawyer can always challenge a judge's decision. It keeps happening. It happens at even the Supreme Court level. Right to privacy? I think so. Yeah. Shubhankar, I want you to take write this down. Puttaswamy. Search for the Puttaswamy case. I think that's one of the landmark judgments about right to privacy. Yes, the K. Puttaswamy case. That's correct, Aditya. Very good. Right? I'm so happy that others know this. Oh, Partha told you about it. Excellent. So take a look at it. Okay, so SWAYAM says the reservation in jobs for locals is violation of Article 19. No, how? How do you say that reservation in jobs is violation of Article 19? Teeth, do you have to remember these articles? Yes, you do. 19F. Okay, 19F says you have the right to practice any profession or carry any occupation, trade, and business. Does it say you have the unlimited right to practice any profession? Plus, where I have not written it, but subject to conditions, right? Everything is subject to conditions. Do you agree to that? So saying that this is violative is very simplistic interpretation. It's a very simplistic interpretation if you read this one line and say that this is Article 19. Open the Constitution. The article is defined in such huge terms. Right? There are so many conditions given. There are so many examples given to it. The wording is large. So don't think what I'm showing you is the entire article. This is not even a trailer of that article, right? This is just to give you a sense of what is in it. But the article by itself has a lot many things in it. This is only giving you an overview of what to expect in it. Right to access the internet. Yeah. Freedom of speech and expression basically. Chal. Now, Articles 23, 24 are your rights against exploitation. Which means Article 23 is prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. I hope everybody knows what human trafficking is, right? Selling and buying of humans, slavery sort of. So, slavery, these things are prohibited under Article 23. And Article 24 is prohibition of employment of children in factories. Right? There are certain factories extremely dangerous. So there's an Article 24 Constitution which says children cannot be employed in these factories. Okay. Right to freedom of religion. Now, this is something which we need to be very, very, very understanding about, very careful about, because it's so misunderstood. Article 25, it says that freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. Basically, you can practice whatever religion you want. and you can propagate whatever religion you want. Propagate as in spread. But that does not mean you spread to whatever extent you want. As long as you are not violating any other person's rights, you are free to try to spread your religion. Article 26 is the freedom to manage religious affairs. So we have a lot of trusts and other things, right? Like Sai Baba Trust is there. Then we have Balaji Temple. We may have the Ajmer Sharif Dargah. We may have the Francis Assisi Church. So there are a lot of religious bodies which are basically corporate bodies set up to look after them. So there are a lot of organizations which are now created to just look after religious affairs. So there is a freedom under Article 26 that you can manage all religious affairs. Article 27 is freedom to payment of taxes for promotion of particular religion. For promotion of religion, you're doing activities, you need not pay taxes for that. And 28, freedom as to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship in certain educational institutions. So certain educational, if an educational institution is in the name of a religion, right, then you can have such institutions where the students are given religious education, they undergo religious worship. For example, we have Ved Pathshalas for the Hindus, we have seminaries for the Christians, we have madrasas for the Muslims, right? These are specific educational institutions where religious education is given. So all this is covered under Article 28. Are we together so far? Okay. Now, cultural and educational rights. Article 29. It's for protection of interests of minorities. Right? 30 is the right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. And Article 31, right, I believe property wala, it is repealed. Yes, Swayam. Okay, Shubhankar. Shubhankar's question is, was Tablighi Jamaat correct according to Article 28? See, Article 28, first of all, what does it say? Article 28 says that they have the freedom to attend the religious instruction as long as they were not breaking any laws. They had full rights to do so. But the moment they start, if they broke any law, then of course their right will be curtailed. Right? I have the freedom of speech, but the moment I start abusing you, my freedom of speech will be curtailed. It's as simple as that. As long as the activities fell within the purview of law, as long as their activities was not something which was harmful to others, they had full independence to do so. At any point of time, however, if the law was broken, if the public was endangered in any way, then we would say that they have overstepped their boundaries. Now they are liable to punishment. I think that legal point is not something very difficult for everybody to understand. That you can enjoy your rights as far as you do not infringe on the rights of others. Right. Okay. Article 25 to 28 define. No, Aditya. There's in fact a lot of gaps you will see in the Constitution. Right. When some article is struck down, then even in the Constitution, the word repealed will be written there. So there is no Article 31 as of now. Chalo. So we saw these cultural and educational rights. Okay. Now the right to constitutional remedies, one of the greatest protectors of the citizens of the country, right? We are given rights, but jab tak we don't have somebody who can protect our rights, what's the meaning of these rights? So Article 32 gives you remedies for enforcements of rights conferred by these parts. Whatever rights have been given to you so far, This article gives you the protection of those rights. Article 32A, conveniently repealed. Article 33 is the power of the parliament to modify the rights conferred by this part in their application to forces, etc. Right? 34. Restriction of rights conferred by this part when martial law is in force in any area. Martial law is military rule. Whenever there is military rule in any area, then lot of freedoms are taken away. So Article 34 tells you what rights will be restricted when military law is in place. Article 35 is the legal language which gives effect to whatever is written here. Whatever is written here, how to bring it into law. That language is explained in Article 35. Yes. Writ petitions. Yeah, writ petitions, I'll show you what are. We will be doing what writ petitions are. See, there are basically writ petitions are when you have a prayer in front of the court. You want to go to the Supreme Court and you want them to perform certain action for you. There are different writ petitions which can be filed against them. Right? Habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, prohibition, and quo warranto. These are the 5 writ petitions. So basically, when you want the government, when you want the authorities to produce a certain person in front of the court, you're not sure that the person has been legally or illegally detained, and you want them to be produced in front of the court, then you file a writ petition of habeas corpus, and it will issue a writ petition of habeas corpus, and the person has to be brought. If you believe something has been done beyond the authority, then the Supreme Court will issue a petition of quo warranto, asking you what is your authority for doing this. Each of these have been explained in detail in our IQ book. Open and read, right? But the writ petitions are basically at the Supreme Court level. Chalo. Now, some other important articles, a bit random, but nevertheless very important. Article 80 tells you the number of seats in the Rajya Sabha. Article 80, it defines how many seats should be there in the Rajya Sabha. Article 81, obviously, number of seats in the Lok Sabha, right? Article 343, it tells you about Hindi as the official language. Article 343 tells you about Hindi as the official language. Article 356 is the imposition of president's rule in states. Right? When there is a constitutional breakdown, when the government established by law is deemed to be unfit, they declare that there's a breakdown of the constitutional machinery, then president's rule is imposed in that state, which can be for a maximum of 6 months and which can be extended. Do you know which was the first state to face president's rule in India? Punjab, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Maninagar. Zarna, Maninagar is not in a state. Maninagar is a place. It was Punjab. Punjab was the first state to have president's rule. Anyway, and Article 370, I'll check. Okay, if it was Kerala, then I will check. Let me check that. Article 370, I think now to everybody should be aware of 370, right? Special status to Kashmir, which has now been repealed, right? Article 370, special status to Kashmir, has now been repealed. Now, so we go back to our fundamentals: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Did you understand each of these 5 words? I've already explained them once before. Right? Excellent. Chalo. We know democratic state. We know we are a republic. Okay. Now, till 1979, the right to property was included in fundamental rights article, but through 42nd amendment it has been made an ordinary right, and article 300A has been included in the constitution. Now we have something known as the parliamentary form of government, right? Our constituent assembly, it decided that instead of a presidential system, having the parliamentary form of government would be appropriate. And we decided to adopt this both for the state and the center. So we have the president, who is the nominal head, the titular head, but it is the prime minister who is the real executive head. So the Council of Ministers is responsible before the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of the Union Parliament, right? All the main activities for the Parliament, it happens before the Lok Sabha. And there is a lot of relationship, the close relationship between the executive and the legislature, right? The tenure of the Council of Ministers is till it enjoys the confidence. Now, there's a fixed size. Yeah, so see, understand. The legislative creates the laws, the executive runs the machinery, and the judiciary sees that the law is not broken. So these are the three pillars of democracy: the legislative, the judiciary, and the executive. Do you know unofficially which is the fourth pillar of democracy? What is unofficially called the fourth pillar of democracy? Yeah. Media. The media is supposed to be the fourth pillar of democracy. Just like the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative are supposed to hold up democracy, a good media is responsible for making sure that the democracy is well and functional in our country. Okay. Now, the Council of Ministers, under this amendment, the size of the Council of Ministers of both center and state has been fixed. So it cannot be more than 15% of the total strength of the lower house of the parliament. That means if Lok Sabha has X number of people totally in it, then the number of ministers in the Council of Ministers cannot be more than 15% of that, right? Do the maths. So in case the strength of the Legislative Assembly is 60 or less, then the maximum number of the ministers will be 12, which includes the Chief Minister. Right? So, how is the Chief Minister selected? Let's go with the Prime Minister, because whatever happens at the national level also happens at the state level. So, how is the Prime Minister of the country selected? He doesn't have to be the head of the winning party. It's not by an interview process or anything. It's not by the vote. See, the people's representatives, they are all selected by elections, right? We elect our representatives, and the person and the party which has majority of winners is declared to be the ruling party. Now, it is the prerogative of the ruling party whom they appoint as the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister need not be an elected candidate, right? They say, okay, they say this will be our Prime Minister, and the President just appoints him. But the Prime Minister is not selected by the President. Do you know the Prime Minister does not even have to be elected by the people? For example, the only condition is once a person is appointed as the Prime Minister, within 6 months they have to be elected. But they need not be an elected representative at the time of their appointment. Classic example being Manmohan Singh. Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he was appointed as a Prime Minister, was not an elected member of the Parliament. Within 6 months, he fought an election and was appointed, and then the PMship was confirmed. Yes? So, the Prime Minister need not be the leader of the party or any particular thing. It can be any person. The only condition is within 6 months of appointment, they need to win the elections and be elected to the house. Okay. Now, the Indian constitution is not rigid like US, but it is not flexible like Great Britain. Great Britain is not even written, right? वो तो बहुत change होते रहता है. Under Article 368 of the Constitution. Now, some of the articles of our Constitution can be amended by a resolution of 2/3 majority and voting an absolute majority of the total members. Right? So, our Constitution has this beauty that it does not say that we are जो मैंने लिख दिया वो पत्थर पे लकीर change नहीं कर सकते. It accepts that things are changing. We need to change according to times. So the provision of how to change the constitution itself is given in the constitution. It says some of the articles can be amended by the Union Parliament by passing a resolution with 2/3 majority of the members present. It does not mean total house का 2/3 वोट होना चाहिए. जितने लोग आज क्लास में हैं, जितनों ने आज बंक नहीं मारा है, उनमें से 2/3 लोग अगर पास करें तो एंड एब्सोल्यूट मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द टोटल मेंबर्स. प्रेजेंट मेंबर्स का 2/3 होना चाहिए, बट टोटल का एब्सोल्यूट मेजॉरिटी, सिंपल मेजॉरिटी हो, देन द चेंजेस कैन बी मेड. You get that? Yes. Some of the articles of the Constitution can be amended by the Union Parliament by passing a resolution with 2/3 majority of the members present and voting an absolute majority of the total members and approval of half the state legislatures. So for some of the amendments, half the state legislatures also need to approve. So depending, okay, see, supposing 535, I'm just taking a random number, 535 is the total strength of the house. So it does not mean, let me take a better number so that my calculation becomes easy. 2/3 करने के लिए I need a multiple of 3, right? Let's assume 540 members, right? 540 members are there. So it does not mean that 2/3 of 540 need to be present, right? 2/3 of 540 means 360. So it does not mean 360 of the votes are required. Supposing उस दिन 540 members में से only 300 members were present. So out of the 300 present members, if 200 members vote for it, so it only requires 2/3 of the present members to vote for it. So if that is available, and in general, absolute majority of the total members, absolute majority means what? Half plus 1. So 540 में 270 plus 1, 271 members. So if 271 members have voted, that is at least 2/3 of the number of people present, then it becomes, then that amendment takes place, right? Similarly, some articles require from the individual state legislatures, right? So at least half the state legislatures should also agree with that. Then it is considered. So again, it depends. For which amendment, what is required, it is all explained in the Constitution. That constitutional experts will tell us. Okay. Now, federal, we have all seen this. It's a written constitution, rigid, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, our constitution gives us universal adult franchise. Article 326, it provides for universal adult franchise, which means every citizen, male and female, who's above 18 years of age, can vote in elections, and no discrimination is there on the basis of sex, caste, color, religion, etc. One of the first countries, right from the moment of independence, we have always given men and women equal rights in terms of voting, right? Other countries were independent for a long period of time, but the women were not allowed to vote for a very long period of time. But India, since our independence, we have always ensured that voting is done by men and women both. So Article 326 gives us the right of universal adult franchise, which basically means that if you're an adult, you can vote. Bhavya, 2/3 wala. See, if an amendment is to be made, राइट, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अंदर कोई चेंज लाना है, उसको कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में उन्होंने रखा है कि चलो इस चीज़ को हम चेंज करना चाहते हैं, उस पर वोटिंग होगा. अब वोटिंग का रूल क्या है? जितने लोग उस दिन पार्लियामेंट में बैठते हैं, क्योंकि पार्लियामेंट में 100% अटेंडेंस तो होता नहीं है, हमारी तरह हैं, बंक मारते हैं, राइट? सो ऐसा नहीं है कि टोटल पार्लियामेंट का अपने को वोट चाहिए. जितने लोग उस दिन पार्लियामेंट में होंगे उसमें 2/3 लोग अगर उसके लिए वोट करते हैं, and that number happens to be at least half plus 1 of the total number, then that amendment is carried forward. Did you get that? Okay. Chalo. So universal, is there a limited number of seats for any party in the parliament? Garvit, see, the number of seats which a party has in the parliament is purely on the number of seats that it wins. So the upper limit for a party is the total number of seats available in the parliament. Now I hope you know the number of seats in the parliament is in proportion to the population of each state. Right? So maximum how many seats a party can have? It can have 100% seats if it is good enough. Baki, there cannot be an upper limit. That's against democracy, right? So maximum एक पार्टी कितनी सीट्स जीत सकती है? 100%. और किसी पार्टी ने अगर ऐसा जीत दिखाया तो बॉस, they can do whatever they want in terms of legislation. And if it's a good party, then the country will blast ahead. But the issue is, with great power also comes great headstrongness. With nobody to keep you in check, with nobody to keep a control over you, it's very easy to get into things like dictatorship and despotism. It won't go communist. No, Aditya. It won't go communist. It will go more of it will become a dictatorship. Communism kya hota hai? Communism is for the state types. No. It won't go communist. It will be more of a dictatorship. But fortunately, we have a strong judiciary. We have a strong army and stuff. So we have enough things to keep things in check. It's almost impossible to think, to at least in आजकल simple majority किसी party को नहीं मिलती. Do you really think that they are going to win all 500 odd plus seats in the parliament? Nah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. इतने सालों के बाद तो कोalition पार्टियां बंद हुई हैं. सिंपल मेजोरिटी मुश्किल से अभी मिल रही है, राइट? 2/3 मेजोरिटी की तो बात ही मत सोचो. 100% तो ऑलमोस्ट इम्पॉसिबल. Okay. Secular state. Every person has the right to practice, profess, propagate his or own religion according to his or own goodwill. The religious dominations have the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purpose, to manage its own affairs in matters of religion, to own and acquire movable and immovable property, administer such property in accordance with law. But no individual is allowed to misuse his or her religious freedom. Aditya, India was the first secular country, right? As far as I know, yeah. No other I don't even know many other countries who are secular, so to say. Right? So we are a secular state. Okay. Interesting is, we have is France secular? They claim to be. I don't know how much they are. Yeah. See, bicameral legislature. According to Article 168, for every state there shall be a legislature which shall consist of governor, legislative council and assembly, right? The two-house system. For example, even at central level, we have the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, right? So Article 168 talks about the system where, like, you have the president, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha at central level. We have the governor, legislative council and assembly at the state level. And Article 169, it provides for the abolition and creation of legislative council, known as the upper house of state legislature. So right now bicameralism we have in Bihar, Maharashtra, Andhra, Karnataka, UP, JNK, whereas most of the others have a single house. You'll need to update this list. So bicameral legislature, Jatin, like I said, जिसमें दो, by means two. So bicameral, यहाँ पे दो घर होते हैं, लोकसभा एंड राज्यसभा, लोअर हाउस एंड अपर हाउस, राइट. So bicameral means having two houses. Okay. Now, limited powers में क्या है? The Indian Parliament is non-sovereign, means it is not completely ruling on its own. It can pass laws on those subjects which have been entrusted to it by the Constitution, but the bills passed by the Parliament needs the approval of the President. The Supreme Court can exercise the power of judicial review over law passed by Parliament, and it can declare unconstitutional the law which it considers are against the Constitution. And right now we are seeing a lot of that happening, right? Certain bills are trying to be passed, and whether they are... So the law cannot say whether it is good or bad. The law cannot say whether it is moral or immoral. But the law can only check and say whether this follows law or not, whether constitutionally it is correct or not. That is the only job of the judiciary. So now judiciary bhi abhi jab bol raha hai, all the farm bills and everything, the only thing which the judiciary is expected to do is check whether it is constitutionally correct or not. Whether it is good or bad, moral, immoral, that is not within the purview of the judiciary. The only duty that the judiciary needs to perform is check whether the law which has been passed is constitutionally correct or not. Do you get that? Okay. Now, we have a single integrated judicial system in India, right? Hierarchical order. The top, of course, is the Supreme Court. Then below that, we have the high courts at the state level. Below that, we have the district courts at district level, right? And all the courts of India ultimately are bound by the decisions of the Supreme Court. The decision of the Supreme Court is considered final. So if you're fighting at a district court and you're not satisfied with the verdict, you can always appeal at a high court. Again, if the high court decision is not something in your favor, you may still go for a Supreme Court. But once the Supreme Court has given a decision, then nothing can be done. Everybody is supposed to follow it, right? Supreme Court is the final word. There's nothing which goes beyond the verdict of the Supreme Court. So, the Constitution of India makes provisions for independence of judiciary because, see, if the judiciary is bound by any of the other fields, then बंधे हुए हाथों से कोई काम नहीं कर सकता, right? And if you want to protect the people, then you must have independence. So there is an impartial method, and in the past couple of years, even this has been brought under a lot of criticism, right? For appointment of judges, there's something called the collegium system, but even this has been criticized in the past couple of years a bit. But basically, it's an impartial method for appointment of judges, and for judges, the qualifications which are required are extremely high. And Supreme Court mein till 65, High Court till 62 years, you'll need to check these dates. Shivam, which target year? No. Right? So, and you must have heard the word impeachment, right? Donald Trump भाई साहब का तो impeachment हुआ है. Just like that, to remove the judge, it can only be done through impeachment of the Union Parliament. And once a judge retires, to make sure that they are impartial to the judicial system, they cannot practice. They can do a lot of other things, but so that they remain impartial, they cannot practice again. Did you get that? Everybody. Okay. So, judicial review, we saw this system before. It is provided in the power of judicial review through the constitution, which means that all the laws are not made by the judiciary, right? The laws are made by the legislative, that is the parliaments, the state legislature, right? So every law which is passed, any constitutional amendment which is made, any ordinance which is passed, any executive order which is passed, they all are reviewed by the judiciary. And in case the judiciary finds any one of these is against the constitution, they can immediately declare that this is unconstitutional. Yeah, they cannot practice. That's what I guess it means, Aditya. Because once you have served at the highest level, coming down and serving at a lower level, एक तो गरिमा के खिलाफ है. Second, even practicing as a lawyer, I guess, it would put too much of pressure on the other people. Did you understand judicial review, Janta? The Supreme Court actually has the power to keep an eye on every single activity being done by the lawmakers. And so now what is rule of law? It means that law is supreme over person. Everybody is equally responsible before law. And even if the man is punished for violation of law, the punishment cannot be arbitrary. It has to be exactly the way law defines punishment. Right? Although in reality, we see many different things happening, but in theory, every citizen of India is equal in the eyes of law and they will be punished accordingly. In fact, if you read the IPC and the other codes, along with the crimes, the punishment for each crime is also clearly defined so that there is no ambiguity. It is not up to the judge कि अपनी मर्जी से कुछ भी सुना दे. It is very clearly defined what punishment is supposed to be given under what circumstances, and from that set of punishments only the judge can decide what punishment to award. Shubhankar, whether there has to be a plea or not, I'm not very sure. See, the law itself is correct, but people have broken the law, then there is a case, Garvit. But law खुद ही अगर गलत है, तो judicial review में जाता है ना. And see, not all, even judges are human beings. So the interpretation of laws, they are doing according to the fallacies and foibles of the human mind. So that means they are also open to making mistakes. हो सकता है उनसे भी गलती हो गई हो. That's why constantly change होते रहता है अपना constitution, constantly change होते रहता है अपना law. करवे, did you get that? वो तो जुडिशरी को लगा के चलो ये इंटरप्रिटेशन है. But then even they are human beings. They can be, it's like Surya correctly says, it's a dynamic living entity, right? It keeps on changing according to times. So we cannot say कि एक बार उन्होंने रिव्यू कर दिया तो ऐसा कैसा कि उसको बाद में चेंज करना पड़ा. नहीं, उस टाइम पे जो लगा वो सही था. For example, take a look at the Sabrimala case, right? I hope you know the Sabrimala case. Sabrimala case, एक ज़माने में it was okay for women to not be allowed. Because that was the cultural norm of the time. So the law reflected the cultural norms of the society. आज cultural norms change हो गए हैं. So then the law will appropriately change to reflect that, right? So see, that's why we say our law is very flexible. Flexible in the sense, जैसे जैसे समय बदलता जाता है वैसे वैसे उसके हिसाब से changes होते जाते हैं. Yes, Aditya, that's the next example which I was going to give. Very good. LGBTQ rights को देखो, right? Article 377. If you read Article 377, it does not actually clearly mention things like homosexuality. It says acts against nature. Now, if you define homosexuality as an act against nature, then it automatically is defined as a crime under 377. But if you do not define homosexuality to be an unnatural act, then by default it is not criminal. So the law itself did not need change. What needed to be changed was the definition of the act. Right? Law तो अभी भी वही है कि any unnatural act is criminal. लेकिन whether homosexuality is considered to be an unnatural act or not, बात उसकी थी. एंड वो ज़माने के हिसाब से चेंज होता है. इट्स लाइक दैट. यस लक्ष्य. चलो, आई होप एवरीबडी नोज दैट वी हैव सिंगल सिटीजनशिप इन इंडिया, राइट? यू कैनॉट हैव डुअल सिटीजनशिप. There is a provision of single citizenship, which means you may be living in any state, but you are the citizen of India. You don't have a passport of Gujarat and a passport of India, right? I do not need a passport of Tamil Nadu, or I don't need a passport of Rajasthan. I am a citizen of India. My passport only reflects that. So the principle of double citizenship promotes regionalism, provincialism, whereas the principle of single citizenship promotes national unity. So the principle of single citizenship was adopted. अगर आप कहते, see, today if we talk about I am a citizen of Gujarat, I am a citizen of India, then you will say I am a citizen of Rajasthan. तो हम दोनों अलग एक दूसरे, right now we consider ourselves to be different from Pakistanis, right? Because we have different citizenships. Now imagine at a micro level we started talking about different citizenships of states. तो यहाँ तो गुजरात राजस्थान, राजस्थान मध्य प्रदेश, मध्य प्रदेश गोवा, गोवा केरला, ये आपस में हम लड़ने से बाज नहीं आएंगे. देन फॉरगेट हैविंग एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ यूनिटी फॉर बिगर पर्पसेस. डज नॉट मेक एनी सेंस. सो वेरी वाइजली द फाउंडर्स सेड नथिंग डूइंग, राइट? इंडिया फर्स्ट वॉज अ कलेक्शन ऑफ डिफरेंट स्टेट्स, डिफरेंट प्रिंसिपैलिटीज, right? Over 500 different small regional satraps and others were brought together by C. Menon and by C.K. Menon and Sardar Patel, and finally we became a single country. So they said nothing doing. We will be a single citizenship wala country. We are all Indians. Yes, Lakshya. See, Lakshya says the idea of regionalism exists even after single citizenship. जब officially single citizenship है और फिर भी ऐसा इतना रीजनलिज्म है, तो इमेजिन अगर ऑफिशियली हम मल्टीपल सिटीजनशिप में होते तो ये रीजनलिज्म कितना बुरा हो सकता था. कैन यू इमेजिन इफ ऑफिशियली दे अग्रीड कि यस वी आर पीपल ऑफ डिफरेंट रीजन्स, तो इट बिकेम सो डिफिकल्ट. हाउ हैज यूएस सस्टेन्ड इट्स डुअल सिटीजनशिप आफ्टर सो मेनी टाइम्स? See, first of all, India and US cannot be compared. They are very, very different countries. Although US has a huge size, I'm talking in terms of landmass, their population is not that big. So it's very easy to control. If you take a look at the US population, it's very easy to control. India's density of population is so bad that we cannot follow a lot of things. Jatin is asking NCQ form, they'll ask all this. Yes. Which article talks about freedom of speech? 4 आर्टिकल देंगे, उसमें से आइडेंटिफाई करना है. राइट टू फ्रीडम ऑफ रिलीजन कौन से आर्टिकल में कवर होता है? सिंपल MCQs. स्लैट में पूछा गया है 2-3 साल पहले. चलो, नाउ जॉइंट इलेक्टोरल सिस्टम क्या होता है? The principle of joint electoral system under Article 325 says that for every constituency there will be one general electoral roll, which will include the name of all voters belonging to different class, religion, sex, and they will elect a common representative. Right? So कोई भी इलेक्शन आप हो, लोकल इलेक्शंस हो, नेशनल इलेक्शंस हो, अपना इलेक्टोरल सिस्टम एक ही है. अपना इलेक्शन लिस्ट में एक ही इलेक्शन लिस्ट है. The same list is used for all sorts of different voting, right? We don't have separate lists for local elections, for central elections. For every sort of election, overall, it is just one list. It's called the joint electoral system. Right? Now we come to the special provisions. for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward class, and minority. Right? We very well know that a lot of reservations have been given. Before independence, there were so many atrocities on certain communities that in order to give them a chance to come up in society, reservations were laid. Ambedkar never wanted these reservations to continue for long, right? And if they were implemented in the proper format, it was supposed to be extremely good. However, for their own selfish purposes, politicians today have misused them to such an extent that it has become a joke and many youngsters are against it. But in reality, the truth is that if implemented properly, the reservation system is actually a fair system to give to people who have never got a chance because of their status. Because everybody has the right to equality, right? And untouchability has also been prohibited. So under Articles 29 and 30, for protection of minorities, there are very special provisions made. So for the scheduled caste, the 68th constitutional amendment was made in 1990. And a National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Protection of Interests. And finally in 2002, the government made 2 separate commissions for SCs and STs. Yeah, Lakshya says in political theory, one argument of reservation is that it is of reverse discrimination. It's also called positive discrimination. The term positive discrimination is also used for it. Okay. Now, local self-government institutions, right? That is, we are talking about Panchayati Raj. Not very important. We just will quickly skip through this. That under the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments in 93, constitutional recognition was actually given to panchayats. Right? So now the panchayats in villages, the Panchayati Raj institutions in villages, urban local bodies, all these were added under part 9, 9A, 11 and 12 schedule. And now even the panchayats are considered officially to be a part of the recognized governments. Okay. I think this is all a repetition of what we just saw before. So guys, that more or less brings us to the end of this session. I did not expect it to end so quickly, right? I expected it will go on beyond this, but we are done with just understanding the basics. A lot of details are also given in the awareness book. So I hope you will go through that. This may be the last session of our year-long series. Then we will be taking up for the crash sessions, right? But our regular our regular schedule as per the year-long series comes to an end with this session, right? So wish you all the best. We'll be continuing with our sessions now as part of the crash schedule for those who are part of it. In case there are any doubts, so this currently we are done for the day. Center Swayam, I'll keep repeating, we will open only when we deem it to be safe, because we are restricted with the amount of class size and other things. अंश सिम्बायोसिस का अभी तक ओपन नहीं हुआ है. यस शुभांकर 6:30 का रेगुलर शेड्यूल तो है ही. हाँ जतिन, तो तुम्हारा कोई टेंशन नहीं है. Right, we may have a short break and then we'll be resuming. We'll let you know about that. Yes, Amanbir. जतिन, नो आपका तो रेगुलर चलेगा बट थोड़ा डिले के साथ चलेगा. बीच में थोड़ा ब्रेक के साथ विल बी कंटिन्यू. बाकी क्लासेस तो नॉर्मल संडे टू संडे चलेंगी. Millie, as far as I know, no, they haven't opened. For everybody, I'm going to send you this PDF. Stop worrying about that. Hetvi, on WhatsApp number, the problem is that I've been not keeping well for last couple of weeks. So I'm not able to answer quickly, but I'll try to get back to it. Yes, the lecture is over.